All right, guys. Thank you for joining for today's mock interview session with Dave, Director of QA at company American Specialty Health. And Dave volunteered today to do the mock interviews with anonymous candidates. Thank you, Dave, for joining. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, everybody. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as you guys all know, how our mock interview is going. So first come, first serve. We have 3 volunteers already in the row, and they prepared their resume and they already sent their resume here. If you want to participate as an anonymous candidates, send the resume here, or I will send later on the link where you can put it to your name in the waiting list for the future sessions. So it's pretty basic. All anonymous candidates, they need to prepare with the 2 questions. Tell me about yourself and tell me about your last project. And Dave, like at his company, he will be going with interviewing as in a regular process, right, Dave? Like whatever you do at your company, like whatever you have the process during the interviewing, Dave will be doing with the follow-up questions. And the most important in the end, Dave will give feedback for all our candidates. And we'll try to make it short in quotes, like in 1 hour and 30 minutes approximately. And in the end, you all gonna have and please post the questions in the chat as long as you be professional, ask questions here. We'll try to answer them as much as we can. Also, I know that among our participants, probably we're gonna have hiring managers as well. So guys, if you guys, whoever is also hiring or interviewing, please let me know. We're looking for new faces. We're looking for new people. Let me know. I will be happy to chat with you. And Dave, I think we can get started.
Sounds good.
All right. Candidate number 1, we have, let me pull up his resume that he shared. And all right. And I share my screen. Candidate number 1, are you here?
Yes, I am.
How are you?
Pretty good, thank you.
All right, all right. Okay, candidate number 1. It's pretty easy. Actually, before we're going to start, can you tell us a little bit like what positions you are targeting?
Sure. So I'm currently looking for my first job where I can implement my knowledge that I got completing manual QA course last year. And also, yeah, I'm really passionate about software testing and looking for a team where I can gain new skills and grow as a contributing team member.
All right. Awesome. All right, candidate number 1, good luck. And
thank you.
Why don't you tell us about yourself and about your last project?
All right, so I completed manual QA course last year, and since that time, I've been trying to start my career in QA. During that course, I've actively participated in several group projects like e-commerce platform, mobile messenger, and music streaming service. I've got knowledge of software development processes and testing fundamentals. Also, I'm currently studying automation with Python, learning how to automate test cases for web applications using Selenium, and how to work with the PyTest framework. This is my short story, so I'm ready to answer your follow-up questions.
All right,
Okay.
all right. Dave, please go ahead.
Thank you.
I'm going to first start with why Python? Why are you looking at Python here in this case as your automation language?
I've decided to start with Python because I've heard that this is the easiest programming language to start automating. And also I've read a lot of topics that this is a very popular language, so it can be used on both on front end and back end. And yeah, I decided to start with this language.
Okay. So just out of curiosity, you're looking at the different uses of languages out there. What have you seen for .NET or Java versus Python? As typically in Python, I see that more for data, okay, or individuals who are going to be working in database spaces and trying to automate, or with a situation where you're dealing with hardware and software, where you've got to bridge the two together. Where if you look out there in most web companies, you're dealing more with Java or JavaScripts or with C# as your most automation languages. There is kind of just understanding how you came to that, and what is your expectation of trying to learn these other languages to implement Selenium or anything else from that perspective.
Yeah, as I said, that I tried to find the easiest way to become an automation engineer. And I've heard from experienced guys that when you know how to automate, when you know how it works, it's easier to switch to another language. Yeah, I thought about learning JavaScript with I forgot the framework. Yeah, after that. Yeah, maybe JavaScript will be my next language.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
not a problem. Just curious on your growth there and what you're looking at to do from that perspective, as that is something to consider when you're looking at different companies, to understand what their architecture is, and that you're meeting to what they're utilizing internally versus what you're learning as well. So keep that in mind as you're going through this. How do you start to bolster experience in other languages? Okay. Just something to consider from that perspective. You also talk about agile ceremonies and how you participated in this through the boot camp. Maybe give me a little bit of exposure on what that meant from your perspective, and if you can provide me an example of how your interactions took place inside of there. How were you working with inside of that team?
Sure. So I've participated in all agile ceremonies, like daily stand-up, where we had a short meeting every practice class when we shared what we did yesterday, what we going to do today, what if we have problems or blockers. Also, I participated in planning meetings where we discussed requirements and analyzed user stories. Also participated with in other meetings when we had the retro and demo meetings.
So
and also,
I was going to say, if you could elaborate a little bit more about what was your role, okay, and how did you play a role into getting to your team understanding what it is you're going to test inside of here? So how did you participate during those meetings, and how did you help to drive the outcome?
let me think. For example, so I can give you an example where we had several tasks from our mentors to test certain functionality, and we shared. So we were split for small teams of 3 or 4 students, and we shared some functionality to prepare test cases, test scenarios, and write those test cases. And we discussed what test scenarios can be useful. So yeah, that is so I participated and I shared with my thoughts, my view, and also I reviewed my teammates' test cases, pointing some maybe mistakes, try to help others, and also try to gain knowledge from more experienced teammates.
Okay. Okay. So was there an example inside of there you could point me to of what a test case looked like inside of there? Was this Gherkin style? Was this English as far as just some bullet points? Maybe help me understand that a little bit of how you structured that and how did you get to the test case details?
Sure. So I can explain you what is the how should test case look like. So the structure should be that first of all, test case should have an ID number and title with the summary, short and concise, explaining what this case about. Then we have precondition and steps. So it is like a step-by-step instruction how to execute this case. Also, we should have expected result for this test case. Yeah, this is
No.
a structure. And
Okay.
we also learn how to write test cases in Gherkin style using keywords like given, when, and then. So I have some experience writing such kind of tests.
Okay. So from the given, when, then Gherkin, where can you take that from there, from your experience or knowledge, or what you have learned from automation perspectives, or just from the perspective of Gherkin? Where can you take that from there?
I'm sorry, Dave. Can you please repeat the second part of your question?
Absolutely. Yeah. Where can you take that from there if you've written that in Gherkin? How can you utilize that next? Where would you see that going?
Oh, we were told that this Gherkin style usually used in automation with in BD, behavior driven development driven. I'm sorry, behavior driven development with Cucumber. This is a part of automation process. So that course was intended that if we decide to continue into the second part of course to learn automation, we would learn how to automate using Java and Cucumber.
Okay.
So that is why that part of manual course included this Gherkin style test cases writing.
Makes sense. No, I'm glad to hear that they're teaching that for you guys, and I'm glad to hear that they at least took that a step further and not just here is the Gherkin language, but then here's where we can go with that. So that's great to learn. I would strongly suggest do as much research as you can there to start understanding that. It's going to benefit you down the long run. Okay. So I would start looking into that now because that'll be an expectation of anybody else you talk to as well.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for
Absolutely.
this.
Absolutely. And so a question I've got for you, which is this is going to be practical in a way. So let's say I give you a question around what's your approach going to be to testing a vending machine? Okay. And this vending machine can accept different types of payments. It can accept payment from a mobile phone, it can accept it from credit cards, or it can accept it from cash. If you could you give me an example how you would approach this situation to validate and test that vending machine?
All right, I will try my best. Do we have any specific requirements for this device, I would say?
No, I'm going to leave that in your hands of I give you the three types of ways where you could purchase something. So keep in mind, this is a way to understand your thinking. How are you going to approach this? Okay. This is not uncommon to get inside of an interview, especially somebody who's new. Okay. It's help us understand your approach. Because if you don't have a lot of experience that we're working with here, which in this case that may be, it now becomes how do I understand how you're going to go solve a problem? How are you going to attack this? So that's why this question is coming up, and it is open-ended for a reason. I don't want to give too much data here because that's going to keep it very constrained. I want to see where you're going to go with this. Okay.
All right. I'm not very familiar with vending machines, but I can suppose that. So I would start with exploratory testing, checking what kind of maybe buttons or options we have, and then I suppose I think I need to start if I can choose some product that I would like to purchase. After that, I will see the maybe price or it's some kind of card where this product should be placed and the price for this product. So after that, I'm going to try to pay, for example, with cash first and see if, I don't know how this called, this cash acceptance machine or what is it? If the cash accepted, counted right. Also, I would see if the functionality included maybe some change, if the bill more than the price of the product. If this functionality included, so I would see if I have the option to get the change and what kind of change should it be, bills or coins. If that, after that, if the amount calculated and calculated correctly and I got my product, I got the change. Also, if I buy multiple products, how they calculated together the total price. And also I would check if inserted amount of cash payment insufficient to pay the whole order. For example, if I order several, 3 products and my payment lower than total amount. So if I insert additional payment, how it be calculated to the total amount. And also if I can provide additional payment with another source of payment, for example, with a credit card. For payments with a credit card, I would check if we have a security, for the security testing, if this vending machine is asking for validation, I would say step, for example, for credit cards, zip code, for debit cards, PIN code, and also after the purchase made, if I can get the receipt with details how that purchase was made through cash or via credit card, seeing the transaction number, amount, that everything is correct.
Okay.
How many items I purchased. And you said that third payment through mobile phone, right?
Through a mobile phone, correct.
Through the mobile phone, yeah. I would check if I have connections. So I think this should be a web application, maybe, or maybe. So I would check if I can find this application, or if it's a native or hybrid application, if I can download it through the App Store to my cell phone, if I can connect to this vending machine and see that I connected to the correct vending machine, not to the vending machine that's somewhere far from me. Yeah, and also if I have access through the application to my order, and if I can check order, maybe replace something, and I would check if I have option to enter my credit card information or check through the third party applications like PayPal or maybe Venmo, for example, how it's integrated between third party services.
Perfect. No, that's great. Thank you. That provides me a very good understanding about your approaches here. A couple things to think about is, what about negative testing? You mentioned a couple things. What happens if you push the button 5 times after you put the money in? Do I get multiple products, for example? We could switch this over to a web application if that helps, like an Amazon, right? So what happens if I put negative amounts in Amazon? Not sure if anybody remembers this. I'll date myself a little bit, but it used to be Amazon got caught with that a few times. You could put a -1 inside of the cost, and you could get your stuff for free. And these are things to consider as you're testing is, how do I validate the negative situations as well too, or some of the other illities? Okay, how do I ensure that I'm not overloading the system? How do I ensure that it's accessible for all users? Is there a keypad here for somebody to use the vending machine if they can't reach an eye enough to push the buttons? Is there voice activation? Are there other methods to purchase for somebody who maybe they're a blind user? How would they know how to use this? Okay, so again, just some other things to consider. You did a very good job actually of outlining that, so I appreciate that. Okay, so next question. You talk about black box testing. Maybe define that to me a little bit about what that means to you. And then where do you go from there if you're in black box testing?
Black box testing is it's a testing when we have inputs, right inputs and right outputs without access to the source code. We don't know how it's working under the hood, but we can check if we enter right data and we get expected result, if the application functionality is working as intended.
Okay. So once you master black box testing, where do you go from there?
I think I'm not sure that I understand the question. Can you please
Fair
elaborate
enough.
maybe?
Fair enough. So let's say you are testing something at your company and you do it through that perspective. Where would you take that next to improve on that? So you have no idea what your inputs or outputs are at this point, right? In the middle, I should say. You don't know how it's being calculated, what's happening. How could you improve on that? What could you do differently to change that to maybe a gray box test?
I think first of all, I need to understand what product I'm testing, who are my customers, how they can use this product, and if I can compare with another product with the same functionality, like competitors application or product, what functionality they have, so I can maybe implement different ways to test it. Maybe I can check if it's a web application, maybe I can try to check through the Chrome Dev tool and see. So I'm confused a bit.
No, that's okay. That's okay. So think about it from this perspective, right? Black box testing is very much that. I give it an input, I get an output. So you bring up some pieces around here around API testing inside of your resume. So if there is an API, okay, you've now changed this from black box to I've got more of a gray box. How would you then look at that? How would you approach that? If there a database, is there anything else you can look into where you could expand this test? Could you shift this test further to the left? Is there something you could do before it becomes to the input versus an output perspective to see if there's behaviors that you may want to look at?
Oh, in this way, I will check if I have access to database, and also I will check if I have API documentation that I can use for API testing. If I do have that information, I would try to test using Postman.
Okay.
So first of all, I would maybe you can give me some example what to test, so I can. So I would check. So using Postman for API testing,
Let's go with there. Yeah.
Yeah. I would check the response code, the response body. If I can get the response body and the response code, success response code and the response body exactly that expected from the API documentation. So for positive testing, and then, for example, if we make some new record, I would check if I have access to database. I would check if that record appeared in database.
Okay. So what are the actions you can do against an API?
In API?
So you're going to be using Postman. What are the actions you can do?
First of all, I would create the test case.
So from the methods, I should say. My apologies. So
from methods. Yeah, I would, to read the information, I would use get method.
Okay.
To create the record in database, I would use post method.
Okay.
To update, I would use update method.
Okay.
And also if I need to update partially, I would use patch method. And to delete record from database, I would use delete method.
Okay. Okay. So can you provide me an example of when you had to do that on an API?
The simple example I can provide is a logging.
Okay.
So when we use post method, we can log in and create so we can put in our get method in a body key and value like a username and password, and open the session so we can see that registered user is active and logged into the account.
Now,
Dave, let's maybe have one last question and let's wrap it up. We have two more candidates. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. So let me go ahead and ask this last question. What is your goal inside of QA? Where do you want to be? Where do you see yourself in 3 years inside of this industry?
Yeah, so my goal is to build a great career. So I believe that I can be very successful in this field. So yeah, I hope I can find a job where I can grow into that position, where I can be very useful for the team to contribute and to learn how to automate, where I can be able to know the product and know how to automate, how to improve processes. Yeah, so this is my goal.
Okay. And just on top of that, are you looking to be a front-end UI, a back-end UI, a full stack tester? Is there an area you like inside of that?
I would like to gain knowledge in both front-end and back-end. I think this is a very interesting field and endless field to learn more new technology, new tools, and I would like to be a professional in both ways, in front end and back end.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Evgeny.
Right. That was awesome. Dave, let's do the quick feedback. What went well and what could be improved?
Absolutely. So I'm going to say I love some of the call outs you had on walking through the scenario of how to test something. You brought up some of the ilities that are important. You brought up security, right? I didn't expect you to do that. I really didn't. I thought that was fantastic. Okay. So bringing that up is great. So now you're understanding the whole concept of it's bigger than just if I test for X and I get Y out of this, I pass. Okay. You're understanding that your product is much bigger than that. And that's fantastic because as you grow in here, what I will say is I'm always wanting people to own their products. Okay. Because as QA owns their products, they become more involved. They become a better QA, not just a tester, but a QA. Okay. So keep understanding the different ilities that you could look at in these to grow your knowledge inside the QA space, not just here's the 5 tests that I've got to do. How do you get to understand the bigger picture at times? Okay. All great stuff. I love that. That's fantastic. And again, I wasn't expecting that. I really wasn't. And so that was a pleasant surprise to hear you talk about that. Okay. One of the pieces of advice that I would love to see on your resume, again, because you know you got to think about it. We're looking for differentiators. Okay, so if you have a GitHub account or you're contributing to open source projects where you can get in and maybe start doing some testing or working on your skills on the side, include that, get that in your resume. It's going to be challenging as a new individual with little experience and all coming from a class, okay, to represent that. It's not easy because people are going to ask for the experiences. Okay, so what you need to find is how can you get some of that to apply and be able to talk through and talk about. That's going to be very helpful because these are things that show your initiative, okay, your drive, your want to learn and desire for QA as a career of where you're going. That gives a whole differentiator if you're up against 30 other people who are new into the business, okay, or inside of the QA world. That'll be a huge help from your perspective.
I will include my GitHub. I forgot
Awesome.
about it. Yeah.
No, that's great. I'm glad you have one. You should absolutely include those on your resume and be willing to share that. And if you have examples in there, take your interviewer through those. Hey, I want to share this with you. I want to show you the code I've written. I want to be able to walk you through what I did and why. Okay. Again, those are huge differentiators.
All right, I got it.
All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, candidate number one. I give you a kudos for being the first one. It's always very nerve-wracking process, especially going in public. But I hope it was very helpful for you, and I wish you good luck. Before moving to the candidate number two, I have one announcement, and I want to ask Dave one more thing. So the announcement would be, guys, if you like what we do as a mock interviewing, helping people with giving the feedback, we're gonna have the limited group program, which we're gonna start on April 29th. So in the next, almost the end of the month. But what we're gonna do, this is a 1 month program. We're gonna do 2 mock interviews during the week, like twice a week we're gonna meet. And on Saturdays, we're gonna have guests such as ex-Google managers, Google engineers, Apple, not Facebook, from Apple and Salesforce. I'm not gonna give more spoiler. I will send you email about our program, but welcome everyone who want to practice your interviewing skills and interviewing skills. Yeah, that would be all. Dave, for you, I have a question. You have a tremendous experience as a individual contributor and as a manager at the same time. And you've been quite a while in American Specialty Health, right? So
Yes.
can you tell me, what are you guys looking during the interview? During the interview such like this, obviously that was a mock interview, you were more upfront, but in particular, when you're going through the real interview, when, behind the scene.
Absolutely. A couple things we're looking for is I want somebody who can drive a conversation too. Okay, so keep in mind, it's not always about technical aspects. It's not always about here's what I can do from a technical perspective. It is also your communication styles, right? So the minute you start your conversation, you are being interviewed, regardless if a question has been asked to you or not. You are already being interviewed. Okay, so know that how you present yourself, how you convey a message, how you look, all of that comes into play. Is this is starting immediately. As soon as you show up on camera, you are in the interview process. Okay, so remember that takes a hold immediately. It's not once you start discussing or going through or being asked questions. It's the moment you start. So that includes your resume. Okay, so your resumes need to be concise, they need to be accurate, they need to be, make sure you don't have any spelling issues or anything along those lines, And if you're going to put something in your resume, make sure you can speak to it. Okay. I've seen this a lot of times where we're interviewing candidates and they've got every buzzword that you can imagine on their resume. The minute you ask them about one of them, oh, I didn't really do anything with that. Okay, so why is this on your resume? Because honestly, that's maybe why I brought you in for the conversation is you listed a skill set on here that I'm interested in. And maybe it was a differentiator. But then once we get into the conversation, I come to find out that maybe you have zero experience and it's just something you learned. You looked at online, but you've never applied. Okay. So that to me is something we're always looking at. I love to see GitHub repositories. I do. I look at that every time if I see it on a resume. I'm going to go into your GitHub. Okay. I'm going to see what you have there. I'm curious. I want to know what your passion lies around here. What are you doing above and beyond your normal day-to-day job to set yourself apart? How are you continuing to learn in this industry? QA wasn't always a career path seen by many people. It is now. So we look at that. What is your career path going to be inside of this world? How are you treating it as such? Okay, so those are a lot of things that we look at immediately as soon as we start this whole process.
Awesome. And Dave, there is a relative questions.
Yes.
What type of answer you were looking when you ask where do you see yourself in 3 years and why?
So what I'm looking for here is honestly an honest answer from the candidate. Okay, and here's why. All right, so there are many different paths inside of quality assurance nowadays. Okay, we have specialties and abilities. There's mobile testing. There is backend. I want to work in the component testing world, which is very different than a UI test engineer. Okay, all of us are probably very familiar with the Seleniums of the world. Okay, and that's the front end. That's very different than if I'm going to write C# or Java component tests on a back end. Right? Those are very different skill sets, very different worlds. And depending upon what I have open in my company, different teams specialize in different types of testing because of their product lines or their applications. So we don't necessarily target always a direct hire situation of I need this skill set. I'm sitting there going, wait, I've got 10 candidates. I might find somebody in here who's got a skill set to apply on a whole nother team I wasn't looking for here. So if somebody has that passion or that desire, it may be like, oh, wait a second. You have something that I need over here on this team that I wasn't even contemplating yet until we got in this conversation. Okay, so understanding where you want to go not only helps with placement on a team, but also helps me as a leader and a manager of how am I going to grow this person? What do they want to grow into? Because I've got to look at that as well too of, is this going to be something that I can provide this individual? And is it a fit into the organization from that perspective?
Very interesting. Yep, I totally agree. Okay, we have 2 more candidates. Way to go. Let me share my resume. My screen. Okay. It appears. All right. Candidate number 2. We call it this way. Are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Hello, Dave and everyone. Yes,
Good
I'm ready to
Number
talk a little
2.
bit.
Yeah. Let's get started. Why don't you tell us about yourself and about your last projects?
Sure, absolutely. I'm a software test engineer, primarily focused on the mobile native testing and test automation. I have an overall experience in software testing more than 10 years and start my career from manual testing. For my previous project, where I've been working for more than 2.5 years, I was primarily focused on the native mobile testing on Android platform. So I was primarily test engineer there and participated in the entire testing cycle from functional to non-functional testing and test automation, created CI pipelines for test execution and test verification. Yeah, I also worked with different other tools to cover the testing of the testing efforts. Yeah, that's a little bit about me and waiting for your questions.
Okay. All right. So congratulations for being in the industry this long. That's awesome. I love that. With that, I want to start with, so what has been your biggest challenge inside of QA throughout your 10 years? And how have you learned and grown from that?
Yes, this is a great question. I would say the biggest challenge I have changed. I have been working with several different projects, large and small. So the biggest challenge is to understand what is this about, what is the project about, and to make the project make as much effort as you can to make the project of a great quality. And also for my previous project where I was involved in test and automation is to understand which tools to use, how to do the basic setup, basically to start from the scratch. This is the most challenging part.
Okay. So you talk about frameworks a little bit. Maybe define that for me. What does a framework mean to you?
Yeah, the framework is a set of tools and some specific conditions that you can set up and use to help your testing efforts to be not manual. I'm talking about specifically testing framework for now. So this is basically a set of tools and language that you can use and apply.
Okay. Now, from that perspective, what has been your role in setting them up, maintaining, or creating?
Yeah, I would say that primarily my role was, for my previous project, when I came to the project, it was already set up. The setup was done, but what I did, basically I expanded a lot and maintained and brought up new approaches to this. Mostly for the testing part, I've been involved in UI testing and testing patients for Android using Espresso. It's testing, and initially this was in Java, and later I spent some time in transferring some features, legacy features into Kotlin. So this was what I've been working for.
Okay. So you've got experience both in testing mobile and working inside of app spaces. What do you prefer? Is there a preference from your perspective? Because these tend to start to focus, especially in the mobile, you start to get very specialized in a way. Is there a way you lean inside of this?
Yes. In terms of my growth and development, I'm leaning towards mostly Android native development. So I'm personally interested very much in learning a lot in this area. And this is what is my goal as well.
So your goal is continued in the mobile space from that perspective. Okay. So let's go down that path a little bit. You talk about using mobile cards or things like that for doing additional testing, regardless of solution you're using, whether it's Sauce Labs or something along those lines. Maybe tell me how you guys set that up today, and then how do you understand what applications you have to test against certain versions of, whether it's Android, iOS. How do you come to those determinations? Whether it's the type of browser, which versions of devices, how do you go about deciding that?
For Android, I would say there is a chart of devices they publish on their developer site. So what is the usage of different application of different system versions for Android, for example? For iOS, I think this is a bit stricter rules for them, so they just update. And you can see the chart of maximum usage device, and you are interested in covering as much as you can. For example, for Android, it's if you have Android 7 device, then you pretty much cover 95% of all the devices. So this is how you pick up. For example, in terms of usage, some device clouds and device farms, so you can pick up the most. You are limited, right? And you can do this in parallel, but you still have to pick the most usable device. Maybe just each time you can choose any different device to test, to run the tests.
Now, have you guys used any of the Google Tag capabilities to get that information directly from your users to help decide what your true user base is?
We primarily, for my previous project, we use Crashlytics analysis and analytics, how many users use specific device and platforms. And we try to, actually this was another team, so my team was primarily focused on if something happened, if something was wrong and crashed. But in general, we got these details, we got some meetings on like once a month and analyze what we can do, what we can improve in terms of picking up the best coverage for our devices.
Okay. So this is a different question. So from the mobile perspective, which is neat, is a lot of people get to give feedback. And you can go see that out on the internet. Do you do anything with that feedback? Have you gone out and looked at that to understand what the true quality measurements are of what you're releasing out there? And if you have, what have you done with that feedback?
Yeah, actually, I would say we had a great experience in our team. Once a quarter, the entire team, no matter who is this PM or developer, we sat down and analyzed a bunch of comments from, for example, from the Play Store, and then we organized the meetings from whoever from the team were able to join there, and we had like bug bash, and we switched the platforms. So, for example, people who were primarily worked on an iOS application, they tested on Android. Android guys tested on iOS, and they shared their thoughts as regular users, as an end users, and this helped us to understand also the drawbacks of what we're doing and improve in terms of usability and maybe some speed of application. So this is explored and ad hoc testing. So this help us a little bit.
Oh, good. That's fantastic. I'm glad to hear that you're looking at that, because that is key, right? As a quality engineer, we want to improve. So how do we drive quality, get as much feedback as you can, and use that, right? How do you bring that back in your team? So I'm happy to hear that you guys are doing that. That's a fantastic thing to continue, because it's free feedback. People give it to us, and we can utilize that to make our products even better. Nice. So great job on that. A question around your processes. And I'm asking this because, of course, we work in a very agile framework myself. So walk me through what your agile processes are for your company, and how do you approach this? Are you guys actively running CI/CD pipelines? Do you have continuous testing? Walk me through what that looks like inside of your organization, and what parts have you helped to establish or set up, if any of those, if they weren't there before you came in?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. I can talk a little bit about the processes that we had. I used to work on an agile, and initially we started from Scrum and then switched to Kanban, so it was a little bit easier for the team specifically. The release cycle for our application was very short. It became 1 week. According to that, our testing team, we had to adjust this to this process and organize. So we had regression testing, regular regression testing, like very quick smoke testing to do a sanity check in terms of manual tests. And then for the automation, we had pretty much good coverage. It was around 75% for each domain. For the UI tests, developers got separate pipelines for the CI set up for their unit test, but for us, we got on daily basis our continuous integration using Jenkins pipelines, and we run them daily to make sure that the tests are not flaky, they are running and passing. Yeah, in terms of reporting, we had integrated our reporting system with Jenkins JUnit. It has I think, HTML reports, and along with that, we used what is called some internal tool that also allowed us to keep tracking on some dashboards, how many tests pass, how many tests fail and flaky, some sort of this. So it allowed us to quickly check what's going on. We also have integration with some of our tests, not all, for some new features were integrated with the Perfecto cloud solutions and some internal server cloud with the devices, so we can check the reports and check the videos, what went wrong.
Perfect. No, that's perfect. That's great. Thank you. That gives me a great understanding and idea on there. A follow-up on this is, you talk about your test coverage percentages going up for the UI. How are you measuring that, just out of curiosity? What is the way you're actually determining that, and what's it measured against, really, at the end of the day?
Yeah, I would say that we've got different types of metrics. One of those is the code coverage by our tests. So once the features, for example, new features developed, we start immediately to write the test for each component for this feature and cover with UI. So once the feature is ready, we set up end-to-end test. First, we did manually and then try to automate this as much as we can. So this way, we say that for example, each component is covered, and then how we measure. The other thing, we also used our internal dashboard that we tracked the code coverage for Java code and Kotlin code separately for the tests where I use for. We used large annotation, and we can see. I probably cannot right now correctly remember what was the formula for calculating this percentage. But yeah, this is in general how we did the comparison of what we did versus what is need to be done, how much tests are covered. Yeah.
Fantastic. It's always this is always a difficult question to ask for anybody, right? Code coverage is one thing, but my coverage of testing is a whole other thing. It's not an easy question to answer, and that's why I see this on the resume. It's like, I'm curious, how do you get to that? How do you know what that is? Are you guys looking at all the possible routes that could be covered, and then there's a way to measure against all that from your tests? It's just, again, it's a difficult thing to measure. It's not an easy solvable problem. We've been chasing this one for a long time in QA, so I'm always interested to see how other people solve that.
A quick note on that, I would say that for our regression test coverage, specifically for UI, we used integration with TestTrail tool, and it has some. So basically, we can run the test and see how many tests are automated or not. We can fill in those fields separately for Android and iOS applications. And this way, once we run the tests, it's updated in the TestTrail. We can see how much of those have run. Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned 1 week sprints. Wow. That's impressive. I've been there once in my life. It's tough. So with that, you mentioned another part of that. You're manually running a test and then automating. How do you possibly keep up? And a second part to that is, why manually run it first instead of just writing the automation?
Yeah, mostly we have scheduled set up to run the tests on the pipelines for regression specifically and for some small end-to-end tests. Mostly, I would say we did manual run for the test starting from local run once the test is developed and it's not yet on the code base. And then, before including those tests into the continuous integration pipeline, we just did it run, and then if it is not failing continuously, it's passing, then we included them in just the health check.
Is there a thought about moving those to a component test instead of a manual test to try and see if that could be included up front inside the pipeline before build? Or on build?
That's what my team had planned to complete by the end of 2023, and to move everything to the component tests and integration tests rather than have large UI tests and heavy UI tests, even with mocks. So I know that team right now is huge, makes a huge effort to convert those thoughts.
I will tell you, I'm so happy to hear that. I'm glad to hear that you guys are, again, actively looking to shift left here to build that. Remove that manual if you can. Try and get that check out of there. How do you move that to an automated perspective instead of manually running and then try to build an automation over there? That's going to be very helpful to you and your team. That's going to be a great addition. So yes, keep pushing for that. That'll be a great thing.
Yeah, especially when you're working on the native code and the code base is the same, so developers can interact closely with the
exactly
a future towards the automation inside. Yeah.
In 1 week, I'm still a little in shock there. That's pretty amazing, as that is not an easy feat to try and tackle. I give you complete kudos for that. So with that, how do you guys manage when you find an issue? What do you guys do if you find something that's going to span past that 1 week? How do you manage that?
Yeah, it was pretty much, I would say, challenging, but somehow this happened that we got a great team collaboration. So once we started to develop new feature, so we had, it's a larger timeline that's just 1 week, right? So we had several weeks to develop, and testers start to interact as soon as they could for the feature, and this helped us to eliminate the very basic issues, like on the time the separate components were developed. Then by the time the feature is completed, we got end-to-end test, and we again had some sort of bug bashes where people can test whatever they could. So by the time we have a feature sign off and release, pretty much we were confident in what we're releasing. I would say for if sometimes things happen and we've got alarm from the release team that we got P1 issue and it's in production. So this way we did, if this is our team backend, we know that this is our area. What I did, I tried to produce this as soon as I can, check what is the environment, check what is the device, and try to produce this, capture the logs, forward this to the development, to the team, and have this fixed as much as possible, as soon as possible. Then we had ticket to, we call this dot release, to implement this as soon as possible in between the releases and push this towards the new release. Because there is a release process was built this way that we don't push entire application 100%, we do this gradually. So if we start seeing 1 or 2% users got this, then it's a stop for release, and we try to fix it.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Evgeny, I know we need to wrap up. I don't know if we have time for one more, or we just want to end
let's do with one last question.
Okay. So last question would be, I just had it too before I asked that question, and it just escaped my mind. Hold on 1 second. I literally had a great question for you too. I should not have done that. Yeah, no, it escaped my mind. I have to apologize on that.
Nope, that's awesome. It's still wrap a lot of things at the same time.
Yes.
The second candidate. Thank you very much for participating. It was awesome. Dave, please go ahead. What went well and what could be improved?
Absolutely. So what went well? You did a great job of explaining how you actually work through your processes. Okay. You made it very clear. I could clearly understand how you approach mobile testing here and what your experiences are and how you were going through that. Okay. Which would easily lead to more technical questions down the line. So be prepared for that. So I may be asking you a set of questions that aren't quite as technical, but what I would tell you is I will be having technical engineers right behind me who are then going to follow up very quickly with, all right, now how did you solve those issues? Let's dig into the code. Let's walk through some examples. Let's go through that process. Okay. I'm not necessarily going to be doing that here tonight, but those are the things you also have to prepare for behind this. Is talking through is one thing, but then actually showing and demonstrating another group of individuals is going to be another. So just be prepped for that. Be thinking about, hey, Do I have the ability to show some code, or can I get a screen up where I've got my IDE and I can walk somebody through some examples of how I would solve that problem? Okay, so keep that in mind as you prepare for your next venture. Again, those things are huge differentiators. I want to walk you through this. I want to walk you through an example. Can I bring up some code? Can I show this to you? We don't get a lot of that interaction at times. And when people are willing to do that, it's just a whole nother experience. Okay, so that's just some thoughts on that. As far as being able to talk through your test coverage, make sure that if somebody does ask you that question, you have a way to truly bring that in and say, yes, our coverage started at, we knew it was at 20%. Here's how we measured it. Here's what we did to gradually get that up to 65 to 80%. We know that's what that is. Here's what that's protecting. And we're not going to automate the last 20%. And here's why. Okay, so keep that in mind too, is that's great. You can get up to 80%. What about the other 20%? What are you doing with that? Are you willing to automate that? Are you not willing to automate that? How do you know when to stop automating? That's going to be a question I would definitely go into even deeper inside of that 65 to 80%. How do you know when to stop? Are you creating more tests for test's sake, or are you creating more tests for value sake? Okay, how do you get to that as well too inside of there?
That's awesome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dave and
Thank
Evgeny, for very valuable back.
Thank
you.
you very much for participating, candidate number
Thank
2.
you.
Yeah, that was very brave. Dave, you just answered the questions that was posted about the test coverage.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to put it out there for everybody, it is not easy understanding true test coverage. Again, it's been one of these magical things we've been trying to solve for a long time in this industry. It's a tough one to answer. It really is. And to keep track of.
Right. Yeah, totally agree. Okay, we have the last candidate, and this candidate looks like pretty new as well, like candidate number 1. And I think, Dave, in the end of this session, I have a couple follow-up questions to you, which is related to newbies, for those who are transitioning career from different fields. Guys, stick to it, stick to the end, and let's get started. We have, no, not this one, we just had it. Give me a second. Give me 1 second. Now opening this up. Okay, here we go. Oh, by the way, and guys, please give me your reactions in the chat. What is it helpful? Post the thumbs up. I want to know, is it helpful for you? I'm sharing my screen.
Because this is a learning for me too. So keep that in mind, everybody. I get to learn from all of you as well. I want to be better at doing interviews as well. So this is always practice for me.
Yep. Dave, as you said, this is both ways, right? You interviewing and you've been interviewed by candidates as well at the same time. So that's definitely and different candidates have different experience with this is something that benefits to both parties, I think.
Agree. I will say right now, I get the experience of, I don't get to interview candidates who don't have, or who are new coming in a lot of times. I'm mostly interviewing candidates with years of experience. So it is a little bit different. So I'm getting to play a little bit different role in learning how to converse with this in this situation.
Yeah. That's something new. All right. We have the last candidate, CN. Candidate CN. Are you here?
Yes, I am.
All right. Okay, candidate CN. Thank you for joining and being the last one, sticking to us all the way. Why don't you tell us about yourself and about your last project?
Sure. Hi, I'm candidate CN. I am a QA engineer. I have experience testing web applications on the front end and using dev tools to help me debug my issues and monitor different aspects of the application. In my last project, It was a e-commerce site that was a one-stop shop for users to get all of their vision care needs taken care of. May it be getting an eye exam, prescription, non-prescription glasses, as well as adding family members so they can too get their vision care needs taken care of. So the application had 3 types of users: a primary, managed, and a standard account. And I focused on the primary account because that's who the bulk of our users were. And also they could add their family members through the other 2 accounts. I also tested the process of purchasing items. A bulk of my test cases were manual function testing, some regression testing, and cross-browser testing. And yeah, that's it.
Okay. Okay. So from your perspective, what is your career path? What are you looking to apply for from this, from your perspective?
At this moment in time, I would like to focus on manual testing. However, I'm open to other types of testing. When I was learning more about the different types of testing that could aid in adding quality to an application, I gravitated to performance testing. However, I really liked all the other testing because they just added a different piece of the puzzle to the quality of the application.
Okay. Okay. So from that perspective, do you see ways where maybe you could add in performance testing or load testing into your manual testing that you do today?
Yeah, there are ways that I can aid my project with performance testing. I remember thinking, what would happen when the peak of like sales for the application, how our application would withstand that. And I also was curious to see how long the application would withstand if we had a lot of people for a really long time. So like testing the endurance of just our application. Yeah, and there's other kinds of performance testing that I've thought of, but
Absolutely.
haven't gotten a chance to test.
No, that's all right. So keep in mind, you mentioned DevTools, okay? You've got a lot of information inside of DevTools. You just need to have somebody put some load, or you figure out how you generate load onto your application, and you can get all the information you need about how is that performing in a lower environment before it goes into production. You can
Yes.
absolutely do that without trying to look and go, do I have to get a load runner or one of the other tools that are out there for doing load performance? No, not necessarily. You have other avenues you can absolutely do there to help you with that and to gain more experience and knowledge, because it is a great area to understand.
Yes.
Okay. So definitely keep that in mind as you go through that. Lots of availability there. And you talk about APIs, right? So you mentioned APIs inside of here. So maybe tell me how you're utilizing APIs from your testing perspective today, and then how could you maybe use those APIs to help you with some performance testing?
Sorry, I just want to make sure I understand the questions. So how I'm using API testing right now and how it can help me with performance. Could you repeat the last question?
Absolutely. So how could you, if you have these APIs and you're hitting them today, how could you look at using them in the future to help you doing some load testing?
Yeah, so the way I did API testing was through Postman. I utilized it to validate the different responses. For example, I tested to check the flow of how our end users would add a favorite item to their wish list. And I created a collection, and I grabbed all the different requests, the curls of that, and imported them into Postman. And it was just to make sure that the users could add them correctly into their wish list and not add something random that wasn't in the marketplace. In the future, how I can use API testing, I'm not sure how to answer that question.
So think about this. You've got a collection of information already that you're passing to the API, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So what if you put that in a loop and you're just sending a bunch of requests to your API? You're flooding it with messages.
That is true. Yeah.
If you work with your dev team to understand, hey, what is supposed to be the capacity of this API before it slows down, or how much throughput are we supposed to have or be able to handle, you now can start to build out some type of performance type of testing here that at least gives some type of coverage or information back to you and your team that, hey, it can handle up to this. We know that. We've seen it do that. Okay. It's just an idea. It's something you could look into.
Yes. That is, yes.
So just, it's more opportunity for you to grow, take on some new things, and maybe bring back to your team and say, hey, here's something I want to try.
Yeah, will do. I will definitely play with that idea.
So an agile question here. What is definition of done to you and your team as far as testing goes and quality?
Definition of done. Oh gosh. Let me think about that. During our agile sprint, towards the end, we would do a regression test to check to see if the test cases that were run met the acceptance criteria. Let's see. And oh my gosh.
That's all right. Yeah, if you don't know, that's okay. All right. And the reason for this question is you're bringing up different styles of tests, right? So how would you get that into your definition of done if it doesn't exist yet? So it now is part of your process, right? You guys don't get to go out the door without it.
Yes. I know that there would be a risk analysis to see if like certain bugs could be postponed depending on if our users would be running into that bug often. Oh geez. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's all right. Again, this may not be something you've got privy to at the moment, but that is something that I would recommend. Make sure you understand that and see if there are ways to improve it, right? If you guys want to improve quality, how do you drive that to your definition of done as well too, right? How do you ensure that your teams are keeping all that in mind as you're releasing or you're building code? Okay. Another question I have is, inside your skills, you've got a couple things listed here. And it's very difficult for me to get an idea about what other skills you may have. You've got Jira, Browser Stack, Postman, and SQL. Help me understand a little bit more about you as an individual and the skills you're bringing to the table as a quality engineer that would be applicable for a position.
Using the tools?
Not necessarily, not the tools, but your skills. You've only mentioned tools and a language. So help me understand what other capabilities you're bringing to the table from a quality perspective. Because Jira, Browser Stack, and Postman, this is all I see. These are common tools all of us use every day, right? So these are things that I should be able to teach any QA engineer. So what other pieces are going to set you apart inside of the interview process or inside of this resume that would make me want to continue looking further? Okay, how are you setting yourself apart with just that listed inside of your skills?
That is a great question.
How would you highlight yourself?
How would I highlight myself? Oh, goodness.
You talk about API testing, right? You talk about monitoring logs, and I'm assuming you have some type of alerting going on, and I don't know if you're part of that or not. But what other skill sets? If I've got you and 30 people, what other skill sets am I judging you against these other 30 people? Now, keep in mind, skill sets don't always have to be related to quality assurance, too.
Yes. The only one that right now is popping in my head is my academic tutor experience. That was a very rewarding position to have because when I would help my students, at least when they came in, they were very inexperienced in like the topics of what they were learning, and they felt defeated because they thought that they couldn't do the math problems. But after spending some time with them and just catering the topic to them and their abilities, we were able to start having them do well in their topics, and to the point that they were running circles around me. So I have the ability to distill complicated information to people who are non-technical.
Okay. So I like to look at that as mentorship in a way, right? You're mentoring others. Whether you want to see it that way or not, that is a skill. Okay. And that is something that you can absolutely highlight on here and should. All right. Just because you may not have done it at your last two companies or it's not related to quality assurance, it is. All right. Having those skill sets are a greater aspect and a greater value to organizations than just a technical skill set. Okay. I am not just judging people on their technical capabilities. I need to get to know you as a person. So during an interview, that's the process is I want to get to know you, you want to get to know me or the company, so we can see if there's a mutual agreement here. It's difficult in your skills section to get that. Okay. It's challenging for me to poke further down in some of those questions of what your skills are because I'm not quite sure what to ask you from that perspective. We can definitely talk about your experience, but I can't go any deeper because I don't know quite where to go with those questions. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
And I think you're selling yourself short. I'm going to say that right now. I think you have a greater set of skill sets than you're leaning on. I think you have a lot more you can absolutely put in there just from this small conversation.
Definitely. I think let's wrap it up into the feedback. And you already gave some partially feedback. I think the level of energy you need to bring it up a little bit. It depends. I know this is very hard. I would say it's more soft skills, right? Like you need to sync with your interviewer. Ideally, obviously, you don't have to, but the level of energy would be much better if you would be in sync.
It's confidence, right? You always want to make sure you're exuberating confidence, but there's a balance to that because you don't want to come off being condescending either. And that's tough. It is a balance inside there, and it does take practice. It's something that we all have to work on. I'm not sure there isn't anybody who doesn't have to work on those skill sets, and it's continuous. And Evgeny's right. This is a little challenging because what I don't have in front of me is, okay, here's the jobs that I'm hiring for in front of me. So I'm not gauging you necessarily against my criteria 100% because I'm not doing that right now, but I am judging to a degree and trying to use what I would normally do here. But you're not posting directly for a position of mine. This has been a great learning experience for me in trying to balance this and figure out how do I interview a little bit differently if I have to approach this in a different perspective. Okay. And it is different in this way. So I thank everybody for participating in this today.
Yeah, definitely. What else you would suggest in terms of what went well, what should be improved
Okay. I'm sorry, I was looking at some of the questions there. I've given me real quick. So from this resume specifically, or from this interview,
from this
or in
interview?
general? Okay. So what went well? I honestly, I think you have a lot more here in your resume. Okay, and I like how you have your resume listed out here to talk to, and you need to be able to talk to it. Okay, and that's part of it. How do you walk somebody through your experience clearly? All right, you started doing that for me, and then it got a little bit muddied, and you weren't quite so self-confident. Be confident. You know what you're talking about. I can feel you definitely know what you're talking about and how you do your work day in and day out. Be clear about it. Let me know, right? The more confident you are, the more it's going to drive the individual on the other side of, hey, all right, I can continue to drive this person to another level, another set of questions. And I may hit a wall, but that's okay. Because sometimes we're going to take it that far where you may not know. You may not know the answer to a question. And I will tell everybody right now, I'd rather have you say, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm willing to go research and figure it out than to try and fumble through it. Okay. Don't ever try and fake an answer to somebody because you have no idea the skill sets on the other end. You don't know what somebody else knows. Okay. So if you don't know, say that. Be upfront. I don't know, or I've never done that before. But you know what? Here's what I have done. And it shows that I am willing to learn and can grow in this, and I'm willing to take that on. I just may not have been exposed to it in my company. That's all right. We understand that. Not everybody's going to get the same experiences depending upon where you work.
Awesome. Awesome. Dave, we
Thank
kind
you.
of a little bit late. Thank you very much, candidate number 3. You did a tremendous job
Thank
sticking
you.
to us all the way through. And I know this stuff, especially being in public, but thank you very much. And I wish you the best in the job search. And Dave, I know that we're a little bit late, but I have very important question. And guys, same here. If you want, you can drop. But my question, Dave, for new people like who is transitioning from different jobs, they don't have experience. They went through some either self-paced learning or boot camps, courses. Even I know a lot of people who went through associate degree in computer science. They also have struggled with explaining with and job searching. So what would be your advice for those people without experience on which they can rely on, right? But how they can gain this experience? What would be your job searching strategy if you would be in their shoes?
Okay. So if I was in that position, one, I know this is not always easy, okay? But there are a lot of open source projects out there, okay? Firefox on its own right. I used to open source test for them all the time. Anybody could. And you're contributing to the community, you're contributing to the groups, right? So you're submitting bugs, you're testing, you're playing, you're getting to learn. It's playground, really. You get exposure, okay? You can write your own automation if you so choose. So my advice is to do those things, okay? To do exactly that. Learn how to write this on your own. It doesn't have to be through a company, right? So all of you can set up your own GitHubs. All of you could do some basic automation from that perspective, or be able to talk through how you have learned testing through open source projects. Again, these are huge differentiators. If I were to sit there and ask the majority of their associate level position coming out of college or very little to zero experience, how many of them have done so many such things like that? It's going to be slim to none. Okay. So if I've got somebody who I know is coming in the door with little experience and they come and tell me, hey, look, I participated in the open source community and trying to help better some of these projects. And there's a lot of them. There are tons of them out there. Okay. I contributed to this. I learned some new techniques by doing these things. Here's what I've learned. that is an amazing situation right there. Because again, that's going to tell anybody who's hiring, you've got the drive, you've got the passion for quality, and you're taking your own control of your own growth. That's another big separator, right? When people own their own growth potentials and they're driving it on their own, boy, that's a big step. Because there's at times where us in leadership, we've got to pull that out of people, and that can be very hard. And trying to pull out, how do I get this individual to go learn this new skill? What if they don't want to? Okay. What if I've got somebody who's going to pass them up? That's awesome. I'm going to encourage and I'm going to push that other individual even more, who's going to be, I'm a self-learner. I'm going to keep growing. I'm going to keep challenging myself. I still do this. I'm going to be taking a Microsoft 900 course here up in a couple of weeks, so I get my certification for that. Why? So I can be on the same level playing field as my engineers and speak in language when it comes to cloud. I don't have a ton of experience there, but I've got to continue to build my skills. These are things that I'm going to do on my own to make sure that I'm keeping up inside of here and learning new techniques, languages, whatever it may be. I play on my own. I've helped build websites for people in the past. I did this to get experience. How do I learn how to interact with APIs from Google and things like that in the past? It wasn't always upfront, so I had to go learn these things. I took that on my own. I've contributed to open source projects. Gaining that experience was a huge benefit to me. It was an eye-opener, and it was something that I could put on my resume and bring into the door with me as well too. And I will tell you, it's always an interesting conversation starter, because it's not something many people will do.
Awesome. Yep, definitely. On my side, I can add here as well. Networking is one of the most crucial part, because when you're applying on the open market, you're competing with everyone, and it's very hard. It's very hard even for experienced folks either. So it doesn't really matter. But what really helps, and it works for both, for experienced and for inexperienced, networking. And by networking, I'm not meaning that bugging everyone in the LinkedIn and can you refer me? Do you have a job? No, this is not networking. This is spamming. Yeah, what by networking, establish the relationship. It depends, right? What Dave just mentioned, participating in open source projects, you standing out. People will make other people want you to refer. Let me put it this way. I'll give you just a few examples. I have a couple people who help me out personally. Hey, Evgeny, whatever you do, I'll help you out. I will volunteer in different domains. And I didn't ask. If you want. But then it gives me like, okay, there is some position opening. Those people will be sticking out into my head first. Okay, I remember this guy, he was looking for a job. Let me refer him. I already did that like several times, and it works pretty well. And there's nothing like difficult from their side. They just did this is networking, right? Paying forward, and instead of asking, give. And that I would give an advice. And Dave, this is what Dave is doing here too. He is giving up front, like he is giving for you guys advices, tips. In Dave, in your work, you are not doing this, right? Like you pass the interview, the interview finished, done. That's it. And that's amazing what you, Dave, doing here. And thank you very much. Thank you very much. I hope, guys, it's gonna be very helpful. About definition of done, a few words. Can you say about that?
Absolutely. In definition of done, from our perspectives, we do call out what all testing has to take place for something to go out the door. So, for example, I have applications that have to be accessible for are individuals, are consumers, meaning has to pass A11Y tests. Okay. Not all applications have to do that. So we call out definition of done for any component that's being built, integrated, or applied inside those applications. Those tests have to run. You don't get out of it. And your A11Y tests have to pass, and there can be no exceptions unless there's an agreed upon situation. So we can talk about that. Then you've got, okay, so in that same case, do I also have to have load testing? Yes. Okay. So I've got to have load testing, got to have A11Y testing. What else? What else do I have to have on there? My component tests have to pass. Okay. I've got to have the component tests. I got to have pull requests. What else for definition of done? That would say this PBI or this story is complete. Okay. Not just the fact that we've gone through all the steps of the acceptance criteria. That's very different. Acceptance criteria is all about the behaviors that you're building and testing. Your definition of done are the things that need to be done for that to go out the door, meaning, again, the higher level pieces. I've got to have the PRs. They have to go through that. I got to pass. My component tests have to run, and those have to pass. I have to do A11Y testing, and I've got to do performance or load testing. Those are mandatory. I don't get out of that. If those don't happen, the PBI cannot be closed, or story, depending upon what you're working through, whether it's Jira or Azure. They are one and the same from my perspective.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you. And again, like, this is Dave experience. This is what definition of done in Dave's company. So it could be different from companies to company. Just keep it in this mind too.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for great example, Dave. Again, all right, guys, if you like this, stick to us, join to our platform that I just shared with you. Let me put it one more time. We do these workshops monthly, and we're trying to do this twice a month. Again, if you want to participate, join to this platform and go through, apply to the form, fill out the form, because previously we were going only the first come first serve. Today we had like more than 10 people who wanted to do this, so we need to do the waiting list. And join us next time. Next time we're gonna have the resume reviews also with the technical recruiters, with the hiring managers. And next time is gonna be in-person meetup who is living in Southern California in Orange County. Dave, I wish you would be here, but I'll see you in person next time. We already met in person. It was great.
Yes, and I should hopefully be out there again, hopefully in a little bit of beginning and get to meet up with everybody else. I know one of the questions was around Mozilla and open source or Firefox, and it is Mozilla, so apologies. Firefox, of course, is from Mozilla, but here's an article on the open source for that and how to get started contributing to Mozilla from that perspective. As far as I know, this is still around, and that does include testing. So it's not just coding. I know I used to do this back in the day. I have not been in that community for a while. I will be honest. I'm not going to lie about that. It's been years. I've had many other things in my plate, so it's not something I've done. But I can tell you, I have been involved in there, and it was a great experience. I got to learn a lot inside of there.
All right, guys. I'm stop recording this.